On May 13th, 1978, a single fire in Philadelphia killed 11 people, but the real disaster started decades before the match was struck. The neighborhood was called Osage Avenue in West Philadelphia. Not wealthy, not poor in the way you see in movies, it was something worse, forgotten. Row houses built in the 1920s packed tight against each other like books on a shelf. Families had lived there for generations, paying rent, keeping their homes clean, raising kids. By the late 1970s, the block was home to about 250 people. Then something changed. A group moved in, members of a radical organization called MOVE. They weren't criminals in the traditional sense. They rejected modern society's rules: no electricity, no gas heat. They kept animals, dozens of them, inside the houses. The smell became overwhelming. Neighbors complained. The city got calls. Nothing happened. Why? Philadelphia in 1978 was broke. The city was bleeding money. The police department was stretched thin. Inspectors had caseloads the size of small towns. Enforcement, that meant paperwork, court cases, legal bills. It was cheaper from a city budget perspective to ignore problems than solve them. This wasn't unique to Philadelphia. Dozens of American cities faced the same math: fix the neighborhood or pay the bills. They chose bills. Tensions built like pressure in a kettle. Neighbors wanted move out. Move wanted to be left alone. The city wanted both sides to disappear from the budget. In May 1978, police moved in to arrest MOVE members. It became a shootout. One officer died. MOVE retreated into their row houses. The city surrounded the block, and then someone set a fire. The exact origin is still disputed. What's clear, those row houses were made of wood. They were built close together. There was no fire break between them. Flames spread from one house to the next like a domino line. The fire department arrived. But here's the thing, they had to choose: save the surrounding homes or save MOVE houses. They chose the surrounding homes. 61 houses burned that night. Over 250 people lost their homes. 11 people died, including 5 children. The MOVE members, the neighbors, the families who lived nearby, all of it gone in hours. But here's what the fire actually exposed. The fire wasn't the disaster, it was the symptom. Building codes existed. They said houses needed fire breaks, certain materials, inspections. Philadelphia had codes, but inspection budgets were slashed. Violations went unenforced. Landlords knew this, so did developers. If the city won't check, why spend money on safety? It's the same logic that drove the 2008 housing collapse, but in reverse. Here, the city couldn't afford to enforce the rules it wrote. Zoning was another piece. Osage Avenue was zoned residential, but enforcement of what that meant, single-family homes, occupancy limits, was nearly non-existent. MOVE had moved into houses that should have housed 5 people. They housed 50. The city knew. It did nothing. Why? Because doing something costs money. Housing maintenance, same story. Landlords in poor neighborhoods faced a choice: maintain the building or pocket the rent. Without inspectors, there was no penalty for choosing wrong. Paint peeled, wiring corroded, structures weakened. A fire in a well-maintained building might kill 1 person. A fire in a neglected one kills 11. The neighborhood itself was economically hollow. Why? Because decades earlier, investment had shifted. Highways were built that bypassed the neighborhood. Suburban developments offered new housing with government-backed loans available only to certain people. Jobs moved out, tax base eroded, schools got worse funding, stores closed. This wasn't accidental, it was policy. When a neighborhood loses money, it loses capacity. Capacity to enforce codes, capacity to maintain infrastructure, capacity to respond to problems before they explode. Poor neighborhoods don't burn because the people there are reckless. They burn because the systems meant to protect them have been starved. The fire happened because MOVE was there, yes, but MOVE was there because the city had no resources to enforce housing codes. The codes weren't enforced because the city was broke. The city was broke because investment had left. Investment had left because policy had directed it elsewhere. Each layer was a choice made by someone with authority. After the fire, inquiries were held, investigations happened, lawsuits were filed, the city paid settlements. But the root cause, the systematic underinvestment in poor neighborhoods, the gutted enforcement budgets, the policy choices that steered resources elsewhere, that never really changed, because fixing it would have required the city to make different choices about who and what to fund. The families who lost homes that night got some money, but they didn't get new homes in the same neighborhood. Why would they? The neighborhood was still poor, still under-resourced, still a place where a fire could spread because nobody had money to prevent it. Some relocated, some scattered across the city. The block itself took years to rebuild. This is the economic lesson the 1978 Philadelphia fire teaches us. Disasters don't happen in a vacuum. They're the end point of a chain of decisions about resource allocation, enforcement priorities, and whose neighborhoods matter enough to invest in. The fire was visible. The decisions that made it inevitable were invisible. We still see this play out. In cities where budgets are tight, inspections drop, housing codes go unenforced, neighborhoods deteriorate. The Then a fire, a collapse, a flood, something visible happens, and we act surprised. But it was never surprising. It was predictable. It was the math of underinvestment finally coming due. So when you hear about a fire, a housing collapse, or a neighborhood crisis, ask yourself, what choices about money and enforcement came before this? What budgets were cut? What rules stopped being enforced? The visible disaster is only the story's end. The real story is the decades of decisions that made it inevitable. This video is for educational and informational purposes only and is not financial advice. Always do your own research. Subscribe to keep exploring how money shapes cities and what happens when we stop investing in the neighborhoods that need it most. This video is for educational and informational purposes only and is not financial advice. Always do your own research.